thought it was just going to be a routine visit to the graveyard. But what I saw there changed my life forever. The night was cold, with a heavy mist hanging in the air, clinging to the crooked tombstones like an ominous veil. I had never been one to believe in the supernatural, but something about that night felt different. The graveyard had always been a quiet place for me, a sanctuary where I could clear my thoughts. But this time, I wasn't just there to reflect. I was drawn to the place by an inexplicable urge, a whisper in the back of my mind telling me I needed to go. As I walked through the rusted gates, the creak of metal against metal echoed unnervingly in the still air. The trees around the graveyard loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes. My footsteps crunched on the gravel path, the sound unnervingly loud in the eerie silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, just beyond the edge of my vision. The deeper I ventured, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. A strange fog began to rise from the ground, curling around the tombstones like spectral fingers. It seemed to thicken with each step, making it harder to see more than a few feet in front of me. The air grew colder, biting at my skin and making my breath visible in the dim light. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, but it did little to ward off the growing sense of dread that was settling in the pit of my stomach. Then, the strange occurrences began. At first, it was just the faintest of noises, like someone whispering my name, too soft to make out, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I stopped and turned, but there was no one there. Only the wind, which had picked up suddenly, rustling the leaves in a way that sounded almost like laughter. Shadows danced at the corners of my eyes, flitting between the gravestones, as if they had a life of their own. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, but the sensations only grew stronger. I could feel eyes on me, boring into the back of my skull, and the shadows became more defined, more menacing. I knew I was no longer alone in that graveyard, but the thought of looking back filled me with a dread I had never known before. Suddenly, I heard a distinct crunch of footsteps behind me, different from my own. They were slow, deliberate, as if someone or something was following me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to turn around. There was nothing there, just the gravestones, shrouded in mist, and the twisted trees that seemed to close in on me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to calm the panic rising in my chest. I continued walking, trying to shake off the fear, but it clung to me like a second skin. As I neared the center of the graveyard, the fog grew even thicker, obscuring the path ahead. I stumbled over something, a root, perhaps, but when I looked down, I realized it wasn't a root at all. It was a bone, half buried in the earth, bleached white by time. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly stepped back. But as I did, I felt something cold and wet brush against my ankle. Looking down, I saw that the ground beneath me was soaked, not with rain, but with a thick, dark liquid that smelled of decay. My pulse quickened as I realized that the graveyard was no longer the place I knew. It had transformed into something malevolent, something that wanted me gone, or worse. I started to hear voices, low and guttural, chanting in a language I didn't understand. They seemed to come from all directions, surrounding me, closing in. I spun around, trying to find the source, but all I saw were shadows, twisting and writhing like living things. Panic gripped me, and I began to run, my feet slipping on the wet ground. The fog parted slightly as I reached an old, crumbling mausoleum in the center of the graveyard. The door was ajar, creaking on its hinges as if inviting me in. Against every ounce of better judgment, I felt drawn to it, as if some unseen force was compelling me to enter. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of mildew and something far more foul, rotting flesh. The walls were lined with ancient stone coffins, some of them broken open, their contents disturbingly empty. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, echoing off the stone walls until it was almost deafening. My vision blurred, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I stumbled deeper into the mausoleum. At the far end, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, hunched and cloaked in shadow, stood before an altar. It was draped in tattered, filthy robes, its face obscured by a hood. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the figure slowly turned to face me. My breath caught in my throat as I saw its eyes, glowing, fiery embers set into a skeletal face. The figure raised a bony hand, pointing directly at me, and the temperature in the room plummeted. I felt an icy grip around my heart as the walls began to close in, the shadows crawling toward me like a tide of darkness. I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. The figure began to chant again, its voice low and malevolent, and I felt the ground beneath me begin to tremble. The coffins lining the walls started to rattle, their lids slowly lifting as if something inside was trying to escape. I was paralyzed with fear, my mind screaming for me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Just as I thought the shadows would consume me, a blinding light filled the mausoleum, and the chanting stopped. The figure let out an ear-piercing shriek, its form dissolving into the shadows that swirled around it. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air as the light faded, leaving me alone in the now silent mausoleum. The fog outside had lifted slightly, and I could see the path leading back to the entrance. Without a second thought, I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I was out of the graveyard and back on the main road. In the aftermath of that night, I couldn't escape the haunting memories of what I had seen. Every creak in my house, every shadow in the corner of my eye, reminded me of that encounter. Sleep became a distant memory, and I found myself obsessively researching the graveyard, trying to understand what had happened. But the more I searched, the more questions I had. It was as if the graveyard had a life of its own, a dark secret that it was intent on keeping. The days blurred together as I pored over old books and online forums, trying to find some explanation. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the demon's appearance, something that tied it to me specifically. The fear of seeing those burning eyes again kept me on edge, but my curiosity drove me to keep digging. Then, one evening, just as I was about to give up, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a shiver ran down my spine as I approached. When I opened it, I found an old woman standing on my doorstep. Her appearance was sudden, almost as if she had materialized out of thin air. She was hunched, her face lined with deep wrinkles, and her eyes seemed to hold the weight of countless secrets. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, in a voice that was both raspy and oddly soothing. I nodded, too stunned to speak. How could she know? "I know why it's following you," she continued, her gaze piercing through me. "Your grandfather, He made a pact with that demon years ago. My heart skipped a beat. What kind of pact? The old woman stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Your grandfather was desperate for success. He wanted a promotion at work, but nothing he did seemed to get him noticed. So, in his desperation, he turned to dark forces. He summoned the demon at the very graveyard where you saw it. In exchange for the promotion, he promised to pay a debt that he never fulfilled. The air around us seemed to grow colder as her words sank in. But why is it after me? I asked, my voice trembling. The debt has passed to you, she replied, her tone grave. The demon will continue to haunt you until you fulfill the promise your grandfather made. It's bound to the graveyard where it was summoned, waiting for the payment it was promised. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what she was saying. The demon would never stop following me unless I completed the ritual my grandfather had started. How do I stop it? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. The old woman reached into the folds of her tattered cloak and pulled out a small, worn book. In this book, you'll find the instructions for the ritual. You must return to the graveyard and perform the ceremony exactly as described. Only then will the demon be satisfied, and only then will you be free. I took the book from her trembling hands, its pages brittle with age. What if I fail? The old woman's eyes darkened. If you fail, the demon will claim what it's owed, and it won't stop at just you. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on me as the woman turned to leave. Wait, I called after her. Who are you? She paused at the edge of the porch, her back to me. Someone who has seen too much, she said softly, before disappearing into the night. I didn't sleep that night, the old woman's words echoing in my mind. The next evening, I found myself standing once again at the gates of the graveyard, the ancient book clutched in my hands. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling around me as I made my way to the center of the cemetery where the ritual needed to be performed. The instructions were clear, but unsettling. I had to draw a circle of salt around the spot where the demon was summoned and place offerings, items of value that once belonged to my grandfather, within the circle. I had found an old watch, a tie clip, and a photograph of him in a box of forgotten belongings. And now they lay in the cold earth, a testament to a deal struck long before I was born. As I lit the candles around the circle and began to recite the ancient words, the air grew heavy with anticipation. The shadows seemed to gather around me, pressing in closer with each word I spoke. The temperature dropped, and I could feel the presence of the demon drawing near, its malevolent energy crackling in the air. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and a figure began to form within the circle. A tall, gaunt figure with eyes that burned like embers. The demon's presence was overwhelming, its power almost suffocating. But I forced myself to continue the ritual. The candles flickered violently, the flames nearly extinguished by the force of the demon's rage. As I spoke the final words, the demon let out a bone-chilling roar that echoed through the graveyard. The offerings within the circle burst into flames, consumed in an instant by the supernatural fire. The ground stopped shaking, and the demon's form began to dissipate. Its eyes locked onto mine until the very last moment. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The fog lifted, and the night returned to its eerie, unnatural calm. I stood there, breathless and shaken, but somehow relieved. The weight that had been pressing down on me since that night was finally lifted. The demon was gone, and I was free, or so I thought. As I turned to leave, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a small, dark shape lying at the edge of the circle. I walked over and picked it up, my heart sinking as I realized what it was. My grandfather's watch, completely untouched by the flames. The demon had taken its payment, but the watch was a reminder, a warning, perhaps, that some deals can never truly be undone. I left the graveyard that night, knowing I had fulfilled my part of the bargain. But the memory of those burning eyes, the sound of that unearthly roar, will stay with me forever. I no longer feel the demon's presence, but sometimes, late at night, I catch myself glancing at that watch, wondering if it's really over, or if it's just waiting for the next time someone foolish enough will summon it again. If you've ever had a similar experience, share your story in the comments. And if you enjoy these tales of the unknown, check out my other videos for more chilling content. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows